Hey, Sarah.
Hey Andrew, how are you?
Great. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. We had a little bit of a break here. Just life was kind of taking over. But
Yeah.
I'm glad to be back in the seat with you.
Yeah, me too. Um, Today we're going to talk about soulmates, the whole idea of soulmates, right?
I guess so. What do you think about it?
Let's get into it. Um, Soulmates. I think it's an old concept. I think it's really something that's rooted in the human mind, and it has been for as long as humans have existed, perhaps, honestly. Um, And well, I don't know. I think it's very, very old. Um, and it's still very present today. And um, yeah, what do you think? Um, where does it where does it come from, and why do so many people believe in it?
I think that we have to step back a little further and ask ourselves, like where does it come from?
Yeah.
And the bigger question would be like, why do we tell ourselves fairy tales? Because I think that that's where a lot of it
Yeah.
comes from
Yeah.
in like fairy tales.
Yeah.
And I think that fairy tales actually very much hold a significant institution in our like grand scheme of being humanness. The stories that we tell ourselves not only like shape our reality, but they also create culture. We create culture through the stories that we tell each other
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think that there's something, I mean, I agree with you that there's something old about it. And
Yeah.
I would say that it had to have served some purpose at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Um, that's a really good point coming up with, or thing to think about, is the fairy tale. Yeah. So what's I want to hear, what's your position on it? Do you think soulmates exist or don't exist? And then also, I'm guessing not. And then also, have you ever felt like soulmates existed? And have you ever felt like you had a soulmate at some
Mm.
point in life?
Okay, so this is where it gets interesting, right? I grew up in a home where my mom was like a hopeless romantic, okay?
Okay.
So she definitely told me those stories of like hoping for a soulmate. There was like that very dreamy, once in a lifetime love romance. And then, the question is like, does the culture change or was that never really a thing? I would guess that the culture changes along with like just maybe that doesn't even has ever existed. Um so I think in a lot of ways that set me up for a lot of heartbreak, you
Yeah.
know. And I can remember, in some of my early dating experiences really struggling with that, like understanding like this whole mutual understanding that we're all looking for this, right? And
Hmm.
then whenever heartbreak comes, you're like, wait, this isn't what I was told was the hope or whatever. I hope you're following that. And then when we get to the place where we're old enough to get married and then get divorced, there was a new layer of that, of like,
Yeah.
wait, I thought we committed to this thing
Yeah.
and we were kind of like, in some terms, soulmates, if you will. We were like hoping for that or whatever.
Yeah.
And then when that comes to be not true, there's a new level of reckoning because now we have children or a home or like this legal process that has to happen.
Right.
And so then where does the soulmate fit within the dust of all of that?
Yeah.
So then the question is, if there are no soulmates, what are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. I definitely I can relate to that story of being, well, I wouldn't say my mother was a hopeless romantic, but I feel like I was. And I think I got that from my mother's devotion and love for my father. And I also got it from Walt Disney, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and not just Walt Disney, but like all his movies. There's all these romance movies of people like meeting someone and falling deeply head over heels in love, and there's this magic and there's this all this stuff. And those are the stories that you've been told, growing up. So you're like, okay, that's how the story goes. That's what I should be looking for. That's what's supposed to happen, right? So I think I definitely bought that story and that whole model and structure also. Um, and yeah, those ideas and mental models and structures get challenged by reality as you grow up, and certainly lots of heartbreak. Um, yeah, and
It's
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was just gonna carry on with that Walt Disney theme in the movies. And if you watch the movies today, they're very, very different. The themes
Uh,
are very, very different.
yeah, there are certainly different themes that have they've been presenting lately, which is good, because ultimately, um, you said, well, if that isn't real, then where are we? Where do we stand? What model do we have for life and for connection and partnership, right? Um, and I think I think it comes down to the model that I like is one of learning and one of like play and experimenting and growth, you know. Um, the whole concept of the soulmate just feels so static, right? It feels like, mm, here's my person, and that's it. They're out there and we find it, and then everything is perfect and good and right and true and happy after that. I just get that person and it fixes everything. Everything is all problems are solved, right? It's like this magic bullet, you know. Yeah, but I I think that the better model is like we're all learning and growing, and there's different people that teach us about ourselves and about what we want and about what direction we want to move in. So we must have these experiences to learn and grow and understand and become our fullest selves and um to become good partners, all the Disney movies and all the rom-coms just show you the first part of falling in love, meeting someone and being infatuated. And then it's like, and they lived happily ever after. That first part is a blip in the life of a human being. There's so many things that happen after, you get married to the person, right? There's then you get into the meat and potatoes of we're different people, and how do we reconcile that? We have different wants, different needs, different ways of going about stuff. How do you reconcile and compromise and create a life with someone with all these differences that show up at different times? And we're always changing too. We change, so we got to
Mhm.
navigate that too.
Well, and I think that when we talk about relationships and marriage and soulmates, we also have to include, um, I think another model to look at, right, is like arranged marriages and how that seems so very foreign to us or like very not a way to go about it. But I think that there's some really interesting pieces to be gleaned from that
Mm.
because I feel like when your parents or whoever create an experience for you to be married to this person and that's a acceptable form in your culture, now it doesn't come from like love. It actually comes from like, oh, we have to make this work and how do we figure this out?
Mhm.
And I think I'm not saying that we should go to that model per se, but I'm saying there's pieces of that that we can learn some very valuable things from.
Yeah, that feels like almost the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it feels like, oh, here we are. We maybe didn't quite choose this, but we're gonna go along with our culture, and we gotta make it work. And it's really interesting. I think some of those, well, I'm sure it's 50-50 or something like that, but I know that some of those have worked out really well for people, and some have not, of course. It's like, I just
Mhm.
don't love this person at all,
Yes, right.
but
Right.
the aspect of like coming together and recognizing that we've got to make it work. That I think that's something that is very absent in the whole soulmate model. There's no work to be done. We're perfect for each other. Everything is perfectly aligned so that their happiness and love and all that is inherent, right? It's already there, right?
All you
And
need is love.
all you need is love, right? There's that famous song. And like, um, anybody who's had one relationship will recognize that that's not true.
Hmm.
It's the whole concept, I think, does all of us a huge disservice,
Hmm.
a huge, huge disservice in believing that, what is true is that there are people who are more or less compatible with you.
Hmm.
Compatibility is real, but a relationship that's destined, by the stars, it's destined by whatever. I don't, even if that shit is true, like I personally like to believe in reincarnation and souls and soul families and all that stuff. Even if that's true, um, it's still a disservice because I think the truth is different from, if souls exist and you reincarnate with people for a purpose. I think that reality is actually different than this concept that soulmates that we talk about. You know,
Hmm.
that concept is a fantasy, is a fairy tale, that's really about, yeah, that perfection and not needing to do any work. It's a fantasy, and it's created by a part of our minds that is there to try and keep us safe,
Hmm.
right? It's like we might, all of us, I think, have witnessed some amount of turmoil or difficulty as a child, and the world seems so big and overwhelming and exciting. But it's like, I think as children, one, we're extremely impressionable, and two, we are just deeply seeking safety and comfort, right?
Hmm.
And to the creation of this image, the soulmate of like, there's a person that will create safety and comfort forever. I think it's an outcropping of a fear and a need to be safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as a trauma-informed specialist, I would also go to say that safety cannot be created outside of ourselves and that we must cultivate the safety within ourselves. And as children and the people who are responsible for rearing children, it's our job to help children learn to cultivate safety within themselves, that
Yeah.
interdependence.
Right.
I also think, and I want to be clear, I'm not glorifying arranged marriage here, but I would also like to say that, with our prefrontal cortex not being fully developed until we're about 25,
Yeah.
and that like aligning almost with like the prime age for having children for women,
Mhm.
it's like there there has to be some sort of wisdom in like your parents who hopefully have wisdom are choosing a mate for you. Now,
Mm.
the only reason why I keep bringing this up is because I actually think there's a whole other model that should be considered and contemplated as well, but it's almost like we have to have the conversation of soulmates, arranged marriage, and something in between that, which
Yeah.
is something I went on a deep dive discovery in the beginning of the year, about the roots of true matrimony,
Mm.
and what that institution in our culture plays. Um, and we can talk about that here in a minute. But to just go back to that like biological piece of like, and like wisdom and experience. I was just having this conversation with my 10-year-old, the other day. He is playing with this, like, what is appropriate for his age conversations. And, I eventually ended up telling him that the conversation that he or that myself and his stepdad were having was an adult conversation that he just doesn't have access to. It's like
Mhm.
there's a certain level of experience that happens as you just live on this planet for longer. And I
Yeah.
remember one of my clients talking to me about this, and um, I don't want to share too much, but essentially, he was telling me that there's certain things that just come with being on the planet, and
Yeah.
there's like certain things that come with experience. And I just wonder sometimes, what are we doing to create safety within our children, but also the understanding of what it means to choose a partner.
Yeah.
And I don't know if 18-year-olds or 25-year-olds are really equipped with that understanding, to make such a big decision. And I would say the same thing about going to college and joining the military and
Yeah.
smoking cigarettes. It's like,
Right.
is
Yeah.
18 really the right time to be considered a grown up? I'm not sure.
Yeah. That's very yes, I agree. Yeah. And how do we raise children to understand that they create their own safety, they create their own sense of wholeness by getting in touch with themselves, and following their inner passions and feelings, and how do we do that? And how do we create a culture of that? That's not present in our culture very much at all. And
Right.
that's why I think that's part of why the soulmate narrative is so prevalent, because alternatives are not clearly illustrated and presented, you know. And not only that, but I think our hormones and our body plays a role. You go through puberty, and everything just turns on, and the gravity and the pull between individuals can be so freaking strong that you make so much meaning out of it, right? Because this feeling is so intense, it must mean something. It must mean this, right? And because we aren't taught otherwise, we don't know how to interpret those feelings. So we interpret it, we align it with the narrative we see on television or that we see somewhere outside of ourselves, that you feel strongly, and that means that this is the person.
Hmm.
When ultimately we should have a lot more information out there that says, if you feel this strongly, it means you're just highly sexually attracted. Maybe there's a good degree of compatibility, but that doesn't mean that. Just because you have strong feelings for someone does not mean that you are compatible at all. And then the other thing is, yeah, it doesn't mean that you're supposed to be with that person for the rest of your life.
Hmm.
Uh, and actually, I think some of those really, really intense feelings actually have more to do with your own personal trauma.
Hmm.
Like if you feel like this, and I don't know if this is correct. I'm interested in investigating, or if someone out there has done the research or something like that, or has found a book, please let us know. But I personally feel that, and I don't know if this is correct, but I have an idea. I should say I have an idea, not I personally feel, but I have an idea that the way that you carry your trauma or your wounding from childhood, and everyone has wounding, even you might not have like trauma with a capital T, but you are wounded. We all are here on planet Earth. You cannot not be. So it's the unique way that you are wounded, your core wounds, and how they match up with the other person, right? If you feel like you're alone and you've always been abandoned, and you see someone and you project that they are the one that's going to save me and keep me from being alone, and prevent this abandonment, right? You somehow, it's all subconscious, that your wound is like puzzle pieces. Your wound and their wound click together, and that creates a lot of the magic. And you think it's this true love soulmate thing, but it's actually your projection. Like they're gonna save me, and their projection, I'm gonna, or are they're also gonna save me. You both think you're gonna save each other or something like that from
Yeah.
whatever fear or pain that you have experienced as a child. And you, boom, you just mash together to yeah.
Yeah, that's called trauma bonding.
Trauma bonding. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it
It's
may
it's
not, it may,
almost I'm sure there's a physiological response that happens
yeah,
that looks like adrenaline and excitement. You know, I'm sure that that's what's flooding the body
yeah,
whenever you have that like, oh, we've both been through this insanity together.
yeah.
Just another word on trauma. It's interesting because only domesticated animals
Mhm.
experience trauma. So
Mhm.
wild animals do not, which is why many of us are being awoken to the concept of rewilding, becoming
Mhm.
wild again, and
Mhm.
not like unabandoned, it more like in touch with our
Yeah,
wild animal bodies so that we can move through and move through the trauma.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's wow, there's a lot that we could talk about
oh
there.
yeah.
I recognize the truth of that. It's wild animals are only present. They're only in the present moment, aren't they?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
whatever happened, that they almost got eaten by the wolf or whatever, like that doesn't exist anymore because they're in the now.
Mhm.
So many of our own problems exist because of us looking into the past, and not
Mhm.
being here. If we were able to be here and shake it off like the animals do, and be here, then yeah, we would probably we would be less affected by the trauma than we are.
Yeah, this is a main concept that we explore in Mother Circle and some of the other trauma informed offerings that I explore. But I also wanted to go back to one more thing you were talking about with like the culture and our kind of obsession with being juvenile or
Mm.
infantile. We don't have a very mature culture, so it's
Mm.
really difficult to expect our children to become mature
Yeah,
when the rest of the messaging is so focused on youth and beauty and instant gratification and like porn and sex and like that's that kind of
yeah,
immediacy.
yeah,
And when I start to think about how to raise children in a way that's um cultivating safety within themselves, it's about holding the charge for difficulty.
yeah,
um I and like going slow on things. um some real life examples of that look like things like everyone in my house is a little bit neurospicy, so we have a hard time focusing on things. We have a hard time being consistent with things. So we had a big conversation in my house last night about how we all have to learn to focus on cleaning something for 7 minutes.
mhm,
And my son, who's very smart and intelligent, was like, this isn't my job. You're not paying me to do this. And I'm like, but it is my job to teach you about how to do something for 7 minutes without getting distracted, you know? And
yeah,
it's that like creating experiences that are difficult, that hold that difficulty charge. I had another experience where one of my kiddos does not like to see or hear about accidents, blood, guts, whatever. I'm like, I get it. And you have to hold a little piece of that so that if and when something actually happens, that
yeah,
charge is sort of diffused within your system and you're not, that's like creating that safety.
yeah,
If
yeah,
you just shield yourself from everything bad all the time, when something bad does happen, you have no tools.
yeah. You don't have any capacity for it.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. It is. Yeah. And how do we then create experiences for them to learn about relationship and how to feel safe and strong um and to be in relationship in a healthy way, you know, Otherwise, we're setting them up for tremendous amounts of heartbreak and unrealistic expectations,
Hmm.
of life and of what they're going to be encountering as they, start to partner and pair with people. So
Hmm.
how do we inform them, and how do we create, scenarios where they can have that understanding? It can be very challenging. And as a parent, you have to have a certain level of awareness to even to even approach all of this.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, but I think the bottom line is soulmates aren't real, but there are high levels of compatibility, and that all and even the most compatible person to that you if you partner with the most compatible person, you're still going to have work to do. You're still going to have work to do with your partner, and there's it, there's always going to be arguments, there's always going to be conflict, there's always going to be difficulty. So, in fact, there's been some studies that say that people who believe in soulmates are less happy and less satisfied in relationship because they're believing something that about their partner or the relationship that just simply isn't true on a fundamental basis. Um, so yeah, there's always going to be something hard. I think relationship is probably our best and most powerful container for growth, you know, like it
Hmm.
only in intimate one-on-one relationship with a person are you going to get into things and reach the depth of things, of your wounds and your triggers and whatnot. You're not there's so many situations that are only going to happen within the relationship. Uh,
Hmm.
and so it should be, we ought to be teaching that relationships are a, yes, can be a source of a lot of fulfillment, but are also primarily a container for growth and healing.
Hmm.
And and, you know, yeah, I mean,
I
that,
think we I think we've talked about this on this podcast before, but one of my teachers definitely says that healing happens within our relationships. And there's a place for doing your own healing work, right? Like your individual healing work so that you can show up to the relationship.
yeah,
But there is so much opportunity for healing to happen within the relationship.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
This brings up something that is related. There's talking about healing in relationship, and it's because your partner is your mirror, and if you've been on the internet, I'm sure you fucking heard that. But I think it can be really misinterpreted. It can be really misinterpreted. It's like if my partner is my mirror, then what they're doing is a part of me. Like their behavior, their action is a part of me. And why did I manifest this, that? And it's like, no, they are not you. They are showing you know? And I think that's the misinterpretation, especially with soulmates. People can be like, we're exactly the same. We're the same. I've fucking been there. I had a relationship like that. It's like, we're the same person. That's really dangerous territory to be walking in, really
Hmm.
dangerous territory. Um, because they are not you. They have had a completely different life history and have a different body, you know. Um, and you may have had a lot of similar experiences and have a lot of the same beliefs, but you are different people. And if you're the whole mirror concept, they're showing you. They're showing you your behaviors. Like, Sarah, let's say I do something. Let's say I communicate, or let's say you, I'm struggling to come up with some context here. But let's say that I said something to you and you were like, that was really mean and hurtful. Um, that means I should be interpreting that as I said something really mean and hurtful, not that if you are hurt, that means I am hurt. Like it can get really muddy, but
Hmm.
that may seem like really silly for a person to believe that. But I've been in scenarios where it's like or like I'm interpreting the person's behavior or whatever as myself, like, well, they're my partner, they're my mirror, then I'm the same as them. If they're thinking and feeling that way, I should be thinking and feeling that way too, but I'm not, or something like that.
Yeah, that really feels like that's the lack of like defining yourself,
Yeah.
like being
Yeah.
whole and complete on your own.
Yeah.
And, obviously your partner shouldn't weigh in on like life decisions and stuff like that. But if you can't see or locate yourself within the relationship,
Yeah.
there's something going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and almost the relationship should be its separate like entity that needs to be tended to and cared
Yeah.
for
Yes. Yes.
separately than like yourself. Like you need to be tending to yourself. I have a tattoo on my arm that is about that. Actually, it's an Osho quote, the philosopher, that he says something like, I'm gonna butcher this, but he says something like, you have to have a wing of love and a wing of freedom in order to fly. And
Mm,
like that you have to, and it's a Vesica Pisces, which is the two circles intersecting to make a third. And the whole concept is that the third circle is your relationship, and it should be seen as its own um full complete circle.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, so basically what we're saying is that that whole idea of soulmates can really be a gateway to dependency, and also maybe people who are already prone to a codependent relationship believe in soulmates
Right.
because they inherently are codependent.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Can I ask you a question?
sure.
What do you think the difference between, or maybe there's no difference between soulmate and like twin flame? Have you heard that term before?
Yes, I've heard that. That's a very popular term on the internet these days. I believe the differentiation is twin flames is like a soul that you've incarnated on Earth with, that you have agreed to partner with to learn something and do hard work. You are like soul family and very, very close, and like love each other in a deep way that's this similar to soulmates, but you're not actually meant to be together. You're meant to like use each other as a pole to grow from, something like
Mm,
polarity to
interesting.
grow from. I think that's my interpretation. I could be wrong. But maybe people conflate twin souls and soulmates all the time. I don't know.
I don't know either. When you were kind of talking about soulmates and sort of that mirror and things, I was kind of like, that almost sounds like a twin flame too, in that like you're both burning and you're trying to burn the same.
Mhm.
But I don't really know the distinctions either. That's
Yeah,
why I asked.
I think the twin flame is like you're not actually supposed to be together. It's supposed to be a deeply passionate and intense relationship that you learn from, but ultimately do not remain together.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Mm.
maybe.
Which could be like a friend too, like a different
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
relationship, I
yeah.
suppose.
Now, the
Yeah.
really good, there should be a different word for it. In our culture, we do have a habit of using the same word for different things. Um,
Hmm.
but there should be a different word. I think there are such things as real soulmates, and people talk about that as like you're a dog or a friend or a parent or a family friend or a teacher can be a soulmate. And the different definition there is like another soul that you have decided to have a relationship with in order to grow or to give each other something or to
Hmm.
provide something. It's like a teammate, I guess. Um, and I think that that is more real and accurate because
Hmm.
um, yes, we do have those relationships in our life where it just feels so deep and so loving and so helpful or so fulfilling in certain ways. And they're not always romantic relationships, but we can tell that there's something special and important about those relationships.
If I'm hearing you correctly too, it sounds as if there's a bit of a tension between the two, not in like a bad like tension way, but more like there's a bit of like a pull so that you can grow together. Like you almost have to have a little bit of tension in order to
Yeah,
like
yeah,
expand.
yeah. There's like a giving or there's some sort of differentiation or imbalance in some way so that the energy flows one way or the other way.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
that, I mean, that's really how all relationships are. There's always, a flow like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And that can change too. It can flow back and forth in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, can I provide one more thought thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I kind of mentioned it earlier about the matrimony thing.
Yeah.
And in our current culture, I'm really curious and interested in culture making. Okay.
Mm.
I'm really interested. I've been interested in culture making since I was a young kid. And because I would sit and contemplate about like the root of whatever problem. And it always came back to me as like the culture at large was a big part of the problem. And I didn't
Hmm.
really know what that meant back then, but as I've gotten older and that whole experience and wisdom thing, it's come back around to me recently. And I think that one of the things I'm glad to hear it's getting some like press, if you will, that like this individualist culture that we live in um is part of it's part of what's stressing all of us out. We're trying to do so much individually. So
Yeah.
I bring this up here because when we talk about coupling and we talk about bringing together two people or like a community or like a neighborhood or something like that, we really can choose a conscious way of coupling, a conscious way of bringing together community. And through the work that I did with Stephen Jenkinson in the beginning of the year, like February, March, that was the thing that we discussed was matrimony, and matrimony as an institution in our culture that actually was about the bringing together of community. So
Mm.
you can see whiffs of it in our marriage culture right now, where like when there's that they go through the ceremony and then they say, okay, now turn to everyone, and now I'm going to introduce you to Mr. and Mrs. whoever,
Right.
and there's that turning out. And I
Yeah.
think that it's really important to recognize that that is actually a big missing piece, in
Hmm.
that when we couple our lives together, the intention is not to be all focused on the man and the wife, the bride and the groom, or whoever, whatever. But it's more so this concept of like, now we are a unit. We are a separate, like the relationship is its whole being by itself. And how is that unit giving back to our culture, giving back to our communities?
Yeah.
And I think that that's like a really big missing piece whenever we talk about coupling and relationships.
Yeah.
And how do we return to the community as like a separate unit?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I just feel like that aspect of community and bringing people together is so like down the list on most people's radars of anything, whether we're
Yeah.
talking about a community of yoga people or like community of massage therapists, community of parents, moms, dads, whatever. It's
Yeah.
like we have to bring that level of community on the forefront of our minds
Mhm.
rather than so much further back, because we're all freaking depleted and exhausted.
Mhm.
And I like the idea of coupling as a way to um, create culture and create a legacy for our children, and even heal the wounds of our past, our ancestors. It's really, there's so much, like we could talk for hours about this, but like I really believe that matrimony as a cultural institution, and
Yeah.
that makes me sound so old, like, and it's not marriage in what you think it is,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really hearing the ideation. I feel like now marriage is really like, okay, here you are two together living your life together. But there is this component of like, the bride's family and the groom's family coming together. Now we're one bigger family, right? So
Absolutely.
in the past, like you were saying, it's certainly been a thing to broaden the community or make the family bigger or to bring new elements in that were missing or needed, right? And I don't think we really consider that today, but it's still true. People aren't doing it for that purpose, but you are gaining more community.
Hmm.
And to bring that to the forefront of everyone's eyes, yeah, there's work to be done there. And I think that exists within the context of waking people up to the need and necessity of community and what it really is and how to have it and build it. As I think the marriage and making bringing that idea into what marriage is and what it's about and what it does exists within that greater conversation
Hmm.
of the need for community and the community building
Hmm.
that we are all lacking.
And I think this returns to this idea of how do we build safety in our children and charge for difficulty because or capacity for difficulty, I should say, because when we have a big, large community, like those two families coming together, it's ultimate there will be conflict. There will ultimately be conflict.
Yeah. Yes, there will.
And that's how we learn to move through conflict is by being in conflict.
But yeah, I mean, think about just there's so many marriages where it's like the bride and the mother-in-law don't get along. That's a very common one where it's like butting of heads, right? You know, you've got your partner, but then you've got this other community that, you know, is now a part of your life. And how do you manage that? You know, it's not just I found my perfect soulmate and now we're married and everything's fine. It's like, okay, it might not be fine because of the person you've selected, and it also might not be fine because of all of the other people that you have now invited into your life.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
But I feel like if we could have more of that conversation about like folding in family and
Yeah.
folding in community in an
Yeah.
intentional
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
there's a lot of opportunity for healing and growth and all those things that you were talking about that happens within the one-on-one relationship.
Yeah.
There's even more opportunity whenever
Yes.
we expand that circle. And
Yeah.
obviously it's not the same kind of conflict that you have with your individual partner, like who did the dishes last night or something. But
It's still
it's
conflict.
but there it becomes maybe even bigger conflict or less conflict. But that's how we teach our children
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
manage that.
And I think for me, I've always identified the need for like really good communication tools. That's how you move through conflict is knowing how to communicate and then having an awareness of yourself and your internal process and your inner world and inner environment. You have to be able to know what's going on and name it and speak to it, and then also how to tend to those feelings, right? It's not their job to tend to those feelings. It's your job to tend to your feelings. Maybe they can help co-regulate if they're a safe person and they've been trained how to do that, you know. Um, so that's just a huge failing, I believe, in our society is like human communication is terribly flawed. I mean, and then texting and online communication is just in-person communication is very flawed, and people are not taught the tools of how to do it effectively and why it needs and what the consequences can be for positive and negative forms. Yeah. So we aren't taught, and then the in-person can be really bad, and there's plenty of room for misinterpretation. There's loads of room for misinterpretation, but then take away like four other streams of input, and then that's the online environment. Then it's just even more ripe for miscommunication, arguments, and conflict. So like yeah, you want to have a good partnership, learn how to communicate, take a class, take an imago class, take a nonviolent communication class, take any kind of class, and all the classes about how to communicate with your partner.
Yeah, and even like learning about yourself, that self-awareness piece,
Yeah,
learning about your trauma, your responses, your nervous system, like
yeah,
those are all things that are going to be
right.
way helpful to show up to a relationship, whether it's your romantic relationship, your friendship, or your family.
Yeah. Because it really doesn't matter if you believe this person to be your soulmate. You have baggage and they have baggage. You are a human being who inherently has like flawed communication, and so are they. And because of those things, conflict will arise. I don't care how beautiful you are, I don't care how much you have in common. Conflict is going to arise. Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, I guess to summarize, I don't think it exists. I think it does harm to believe that it does. Sorry to burst anyone's bubble. Actually, not sorry. You're welcome for being brought back to reality, I guess. Um, yeah. What else do you want to say, Sarah?
Um, I think that it's worthy of a deep dive to understand why we're relating with people in general. I
Yeah.
mean, we need each other. There's the social nervous system there as well. Like we need each other, and to go it alone is futile. So,
Yeah.
we got to figure out how to be together. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yes. Yes. And like, Uh, I did not mean to offend anyone. It's a beautiful concept, and it's coming from a beautiful heart space. It's also coming from maybe a naive or childish heart space, that doesn't understand, like you were saying with your son, like, well, this is an adult conversation that's happening, and you just don't have the experience to understand, right? So the soulmates is probably coming from a young part of ourselves, a child part of ourselves, a naive part of ourselves. And if you want to have a real, true, lasting relationship that can deliver happiness and fulfillment, you need to come at relationships with the perspective of an adult and the understanding of an adult and the skill set of an adult.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think that the whole idea of soulmates is just missing a lot of context, and it was probably really helpful at one point, but
Yeah.
we've evolved from to
Yeah.
something else now.
It's helpful until it's not helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Andrew, as we start to close up here, tell me what you have project wise in the mix. If there's anything anybody can join or
Yeah.
want to attend, what you got going
Yeah.
on?
Absolutely, absolutely. I've always got my one-on-one coaching available. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I have spots available now. Um, and what else am I doing? My in-person men's group is just about full, actually. I need to do the work to figure out when to cap it off. I think I can take one or two more people or something like that, but or yeah. So that's about full, but I am starting another online group. So there's going to be a whole nother group that people can join online. And then I've got a whole bunch of ideas of things that I'm going to be creating, actually. I need to spend some time figuring out which ones I want to create first, but um in relation to the men's group stuff, I'm actually really interested in creating a men's group leadership training course. I just feel like the desire to sit in group with men and do that group work is growing. And I want to help prepare other men who want to hold space and lead a group on how to do that. It's not, it's not an easy thing per se, if you don't know what you're doing, and there are mistakes that can be made. You can probably look for that class coming up. I want to start doing a men's stretching and self-care class at a yoga studio here in town somewhere. And then I also want to create and start a 30-day like breath work and gratitude challenge that I might be kicking off. But I felt really overwhelmed earlier this week with what's currently on my plate, or over the weekend, I should say. So I really need to take time and evaluate what I'm putting my energy into.
Hmm.
Yeah. How about you? What kinds of offerings do you have going on now, or workshops and different things like that?
So starting on November 7th, I'm going to be hosting my book club for Call of the Wild, which is a trauma nervous system for women's bodies.
Nice.
And that's where we really get into that wilding thing.
Well,
We already have 6 people in the book club. I would take 2 more, but then we're going to cap it off at that.
okay.
There's people from all over the country coming, which is really exciting. And a lot of older people, which is I think is really great too, because talk about that wisdom thing.
Yeah.
And then in the beginning of the year, I'm going to be officially launching my mind body coaching business and creating a body wisdom 4-week class with somatics and movement.
Nice. Cool. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, I think you can find all these offerings on each of our websites. Mine's spiritofhealing.org and also andrewlanghorse.com. And what's your stuff, Sarah?
I'm a lot on Instagram at Soulful Circles, STL, like SOLE. And then my website is somatic soul barefoot massage therapy.com.
Okay, cool. And we'll have those links below in the
Yeah.
info
Yeah.
there too. So,
Awesome. This was a
all right.
great conversation. Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. Thank you too. And I'll see you on the next one.
All right.
Bye.